Hi folks, I'm Dan Payne, and this is Web Accessibility for Business Owners. There's a lot to consider when it comes to access. Sometimes we need to block it, sometimes we need to ensure it. In this video, we'll talk about barriers, then focus specifically on some barriers to access faced by people with disabilities. Let's get started. Barriers. Sometimes they protect us. They keep the good stuff in and keep the bad stuff out. Sometimes it's the opposite. They keep us from the things that we want. Of course, when we're talking about web accessibility, we're usually talking about the latter. But accessibility is just one part of the user experience. Safety, security, and privacy are also very important and can require that we very intentionally put up barriers to access. As a business owner, you have to take all of them seriously and make sure you have a holistic, integrated plan to address issues of access. For any feature, designers and developers have to ask themselves some questions, like, how might this be used to harass or cause harm? How might a malicious actor gain access to something sensitive? Can everyone access the things we do want them to access? Can the data we're collecting be used to betray our privacy or that of our customers? As you can see, these and more are all highly critical questions, and in many cases the answers should come from subject matter experts. Threats, technologies, and content are constantly being generated and evolving. It's best to consult with folks who have the training and expertise in these areas for sound advice. So in this series, I'm focusing on website accessibility, or in other words, removing the barriers that people face when they try to use the web. But I think it's important to take a step back and look more broadly at societal barriers, because a lot of the issues that we find on the web stem from deeper systemic problems. Barriers like those that result from sexist, racist, homophobic, ageist, and similar actions and systems block people from the free and equal enjoyment of their rights and privileges. Whether those barriers are created intentionally or not, they're the result of decisions made by people with the power to prevent or mitigate them. Now, this isn't a political statement. I'm simply saying that it doesn't matter what life condition you are in. If you are perceived by those who hold power as having less relative worth, you will face barriers that others won't. Ableist actions or systems are those that discriminate against and devalue people with disabilities. They're a major source of barriers on the web. And at the root of this is the power held by the people who are in positions to make decisions. As I mentioned in my introductory video, I see a lot of great information about accessibility out there. Designers and developers are teaching each other about accessibility, and that's great. But they're not the ones in the positions of power. They're typically not in a position to make impactful changes that affect an entire organization and its products, services, and operations. That would be you. Like I said, web accessibility barriers can be the result of intentional decisions to exclude certain groups of people, or they can be the result of inexperience or poor planning or anything in between. Again, as a business owner, it's important for you to understand this dynamic and how to think about it. On one hand, you have to understand that your product or service may not be appropriate for everyone, and so you may need to make some tough decisions about the design of your product, or the markets you target with your advertising, or the security implications of restricting access. Be very careful and aware of the ramifications of this going into your planning, and talk about it with your team. On the other hand, do everything you can to research and train yourself and your staff about exclusion. Examine biases. Question assumptions. Reach out to the disabled and other communities being impacted by your decisions. I love this quote from Jamie Knight. He's a senior research engineer at the BBC. He says, "Fully accessible is a myth. All digital products exclude someone. What matters is that it's an informed choice, and it isn't left to chance. What I hope you're getting from this series is that accessibility isn't just some business initiative, some box to check on a list. It's about the real world, and we have to be pragmatic about the decisions we make and how we operate. Sometimes barriers are unavoidable, or even necessary. Let's be deliberate and sensitive to them, if so. And if they can be avoided, then by all means, let's remove them. Okay, so let's examine some of the barriers people with disabilities face, specifically when they use the web. The various forms of visual disabilities are especially impacted. Most people will think of the web as a totally visual medium. In a way, this comes out of a print media design legacy. In my time, I've run across many designers who came out of the print design world of the 80s and 90s, then became the designers of the web in the early 21st century. But at its core, the web is not a visual medium, despite being treated that way. It's really a distribution mechanism for structured documents, where content is organized in semantically significant structural elements. For people who consume these documents by seeing the rendered result in a browser, it seems like a visual experience. But peel away that surface, and what's underneath is code. Code that is interpreted by a machine to paint those elements on the screen according to the instructions of that code. And that creates the visual experience. But code is code. And if it's written properly, that code can be interpreted in ways that are not just visual. It can be interpreted as a structure that can be read out loud by a virtual voice, so a blind user can understand what's in the document and how to navigate it. We call apps like these screen readers. Here's a short demo of what the VoiceOver screen reader sounds like. As I navigate this page, you can hear how the content of the page is read out loud, including not only the visible content, but the structural elements they inhabit.
First heading, heading level 1, screen reader demonstration. Navigation. List 3 items. link, home, 1 of 3, link, about us, 2 of 3, link, contact us, 3 of 3, end of list, end of, navigation, end of, banner, main. Heading level 2, what is a screen reader? You are currently on a heading level 2. A screen reader is a form of assistive technology, that renders text and image content as speech. Heading level 2, customization. Most screen readers allow the user to select whether most punctuation is complimentary. Heading level 2, please sign in. Your current email address, edit text email field. Password, secure edit text. Remember me, unchecked, checkbox. Sign in, button.
Through the semantics of using headings, form elements, buttons, etc., we communicate to the screen reader user information about the page that a sighted user would be able to understand graphically. This is why it's so important for the underlying code of your site to be built with proper care. Without the ability to understand the structure, or worse, if it's misinterpreted, your site could be completely useless for a screen reader user. Now, I've presented all of this to make it easy for you to understand, but something most folks don't know is that over time, screen reader users are able to consume content at ever faster rates. Power users are able to understand at rates over 500 words a minute. Here's what that sounds like.
First heading, heading level 1, screen reader demonstration. Navigation. List 3 items. Link, home, 1 of, link, about us, 2 of 3, link, contact us, end of list. End of, navigation, end of, banner, main. Heading level 2, what is a screen reader? A screen reader is a form of assistive technology, that renders text and image. Heading level 2, customization. You are currently on a heading. Most screen readers allow the user to select whether most punctuation is complimentary. Heading level 2, please sign in. You are currently on a heading level 2. Email address, edit text email field. Password, secure edit text. Remember me, unchecked, checkbox, sign in, button. You are currently on a button. To click this button, press Control, Option, Space.
As you might guess, a large proportion of web accessibility work relates to issues affecting screen readers, usually caused by coding problems that aren't apparent to visual users. I want to talk about mobility barriers next because I think there's a lot of overlap in the barriers faced by people with visual and mobility impairments. In both cases, they make heavy use of assistive technologies to use the web. If a site has design or coding problems that make it hard or confusing for people using those technologies, both groups are probably similarly affected. As we'll see in the next video, People with mobility impairments use a huge variety of tools, especially for navigation and interaction on the web. For deaf people, poorly implemented videos are the biggest barriers on the web. Whether pre-recorded or live, video content that includes audio must have clearly readable captions, a transcript, and/or a sign language interpreter to be understood. And of course, content that's purely auditory, like a podcast, needs to have a transcript. For people with cognitive, learning, and neurological disabilities, barriers are typically more design and content related than code related. And as such, they tend to be things that automated tools have more trouble detecting. Things like complex navigation, inconsistent fonts, colors, and layouts. Text that's difficult to understand, that runs on, or that isn't broken up with images or white space. Moving, blinking, or flickering content, especially if that animation can't be turned off. You can actually induce a seizure in some people and cause physical harm. So to conclude, we need to be intentional about the barriers we create for the purposes of safety, security, or privacy, while committing to do everything we can to remove the barriers that interfere with everything else. In my next video, I'll briefly cover some of the assistive technologies that people use to interact with the web, so stick around for that. Cheers!